Hello, I'm Walt Jurek. Thank you for joining us at Community on Demand. Today, Dan concludes his series of 7 sermons he has titled The 7 Habits of Highly Ineffective People. Today's sermon, the 7th in the series, is titled The Habit of Moral Failure. Dan pulls from the text of the book of Numbers, chapters 22 through 25, to help us see how just prior to Israel's entry into the Promised Land, they experienced moral failure that caused them incredible damage. In this message, Dan will show 3 ways to combat this horrible habit that has developed in our American culture. This message was recorded during a live Sunday morning service at Community. Let's listen in as Dan begins.
In 2005, in Toledo, Ohio, a 15-year-old girl by the name of Susan Richards and her 14-year-old cousin asked their mom if they could go down to the neighborhood Wendy's and have a Frosty before dinner. And of course, they were granted the permission to do that. And as they were walking down the street, it began to rain. And about that time, a white Lincoln pulled up with 2 women in the front seat and rolled the window down and said, "Hey girls, would you like a ride?" Well, Sharon thought that she recognized the driver as being one of her high school friend's parents. And she said, "Sure, it's raining." And they jumped in the car and they began to go down the street and they passed the Wendy's. And she began to get this queasy feeling down in her stomach. And the ladies turned around and said, "Hey, look, we've decided, why don't we go and have Chinese food?" Okay, that kind of settled them down. And they drove past the Wendy's and they began driving into a neighborhood that they didn't recognize, and there would be no Chinese food. What they did is they pulled up to a house, a 2-story house, that had bars on the windows, and at that time, they knew they were in trouble. And the 2 women forced them out of the car, into the house, took the 14-year-old upstairs, the 15-year-old down in the basement, and told them what they were there to do, what would happen next. It was horrifying. And over the next 3 weeks, these 2 girls were threatened, they were beaten, and they were trafficked at motels and clubs and truck plazas throughout the area. Their world was turned upside down. Fortunately, Sharon made her way to a telephone and made a frantic 911 call and was able to describe the place that they were headed to, and the authorities were able to get there, rescue the girls, and incarcerate their captors. This is something that we don't really think about much, but let me just open up this evil that is called human trafficking in our area. Do you realize that there are 313,000 victims of human trafficking in Texas alone? 79,000 are youth and underage minors who are victims of sex trafficking. 234,000 are victims of forced labor trafficking. And the Department of Justice declared Houston, Texas as one of the most, and I quote, intense human trafficking jurisdictions in the country, in the nation, right here. Human trafficking is a $150 billion industry with 40 million victims worldwide. Domestic Houstonians are often coerced, manipulated, romanced into this horrible plague that is in our country. And at the same time, child pornography is an $8 billion a year industry with, this is staggering, $500 new cases every single week that they're finding. And this was statistics out of 2019. In 2019, the Houston Chronicle reported over 700 cases, this is horrible, of sexual abuse in the SBC. While at the same time, Jeffrey Epstein was arrested for providing underage girls for princes, presidents, and powerful predators in his private estate in the U.S. Virgin Islands. Folks, we're in trouble. Amen. When I hear statistics like this, I'm overwhelmed, I'm enraged, and I'm grieved all at the same time. I've got to confess, I'm also a bit naive. That I've lived in this area that's so infected with this kind of a moral decay, and not to have been more aware and more engaged in the effort to do something, to commit myself to doing something to this kind of evil. We are living in perilous times, as Jesus mentioned 2,000 years ago. Perilous times will come. Let me rephrase that. Perilous times have come. Here we are. And what is so bad about this is that we're living in a time when our grandchildren, our children, our youth, and our unsuspected young adults are being targeted by the worst kind of domestic, demonic people on the planet. We've let our guard down. And without warning, our American culture has developed a habit of moral failure. Here we are. As I read our text in the book of Numbers and Deuteronomy and the Old Testament, and I see the example of the children of Israel when they were involved in their exodus from Egypt. They come to the conclusion of their 40-year wilderness journey, and they have experienced some defeats and some victories. And as they come to the conclusion of their journey, they have really experienced some victories. They have just defeated Sihon and Og, who were giants, and they were on a high. They had conquered their land. They had possessed their land. They're getting ready. They're all excited, and their guard is down. And that is when they let their guard down and were hit by predatory human trafficking that caused them to experience the same kind of moral failure that we're talking about, nearly defeated them, caused the deaths of 24,000 of them, and where an infectious disease broke out among them that nearly overtook them. In fact, if you turn to Numbers chapter 25 and verse number 9, it says right there, and those who died in the plague, the pandemic or the epidemic or whatever you want to call it, were 24,000 people. Israel, like America, had developed the habit of moral failure. They were like us, naive, unaware of the impending danger because of three things. They were encamped, they were endangered, they didn't know it, and they were enticed. I want to go to our text, to our story. And so if you'll turn in your Bible to Numbers chapter 22, that's where we're going to start. Because there we find the children of Israel encamped. You say, what's so big about that? Well, let's read it, okay? And Numbers 22, verse number 1, it says, "Then the children of Israel moved and encamped in the plains of Moab on the side of the Jordan across from Jericho." Now, we don't pick a lot up from that, but if you're reading through that area, you read Numbers and Deuteronomy, and you get all the way to Joshua chapter 2. And so from Numbers 22 to Joshua chapter 2, the children of Israel are encamped in this one place across from the Jordan. The place that they were in was Moab, as it says right here in our text. And the place that they were encamped in Moab was called Acacia Grove, where there were beautiful trees along the Jordan River and the sandy beaches of the Jordan. And I would call these, you say, what is an acacia tree? All these acacia trees that stretched along that area, kind of like the scrub oaks out in the hill country. And back behind them, as their backdrop, was a magnificent plateau of 4,300 feet that stretched the entire length behind them. And this was the land of Moab. And this is where they were encamped. The word for encamped, the Hebrew word for it, is yahanu. And it just means to settle down after a long day's journey. And I get it. The children of Israel had been in the desert of the Sinai Peninsula for some 40 years. And I bet when they turned that corner and saw all those trees there, they were, oh man, look guys, trees, water, mountains, yes. And they moved into the area and they began to camp out. They began to let the guard down. Josephus says that the camp of Israel along that stretch at that particular time stretched for 7 miles along the shore of the Jordan River and 7 miles deep as you move back toward that plateau. And he says this he's a historian, and here's what he said. He said, Israel encamped there for a long time. Numbers 25:1 that we read a moment ago kind of confirms that. It says, now Israel remained in Acacia Grove. The people of Moab had a history of the most depraved kind of sexual immorality imaginable. It is so bad that I'm embarrassed to even tell you what it was on Sunday morning as we broadcast out to the public out there. So you go back and read your Bible and you see what it is. Go back to the book of Genesis and the story of Lot and find out what it is, because it's really too embarrassing to mention here. Nevertheless, in that land, with that history, with that depravity, Israel encamped there a really, really long time. They were in the wrong place at the wrong time, and they were unaware. The second thing that we find out is they were endangered. Now go down to verse number 2. Now Balak, the king of Zippor, saw what Israel had done to the Amorites, and Moab was exceedingly afraid of the people because they were many. And Moab was sick with dread because of the children of Israel. Now, let me try to set this up for you, okay? The children of Israel are stretched out probably anywhere from 1.5 million to 3 million. We can't figure it out. Probably more like 3 million than 1.5 million, because we numbered the soldiers at 600,000. So you can figure it from there. So they're encamped 7 by 7 miles, huge area. That'd be about the size of the woodlands here. And Balak is on the plateau with his army and his people and the Midianites, and they're watching this. They see the smoke coming up from the campfire all around, and they're horrified. And they want them to leave, but they're not leaving. They're just staying there. And so what the king, as he's watching from this 4,300-foot elevation in terror with his Midianite allies, he hires a false prophet by the name of Balaam to target the people of Israel and pronounce a curse upon them. Let's continue to read. Latter part of verse 4. And Balak of Zippor was the king of the Moabites at that time, and he sent messengers to Balaam, the son of Beor of Pethor, which is near the river in the land of the sons of his people, to call him, saying, look, A people that's come from Egypt, see, they cover the face of the earth. And, and they're sitting next to me. Therefore, please come at once and curse this people for me. Let me talk to you about Balaam or Balaam, however you want to say his name, was kind of an unusual character in the Old Testament. He was a famous false prophet who was in the ministry for the money. I'm not going to say another word, okay? And what's weird about this guy is he seemed to be powerful. He had conversations with God. And God would restrain him and then unrestrain him. And so really an unusual guy. and this is who Balak hires to come and curse the people of Israel, to target the people of Israel, to bring a curse upon them. Now here's the thing. 3 times he stands on that plateau, tries to get a vantage point, and really, really wants to curse the people. But as he's beginning to want to curse the people, God restrains him and causes him to bless the people. Over here, over there, over here. Not only that, back in his hometown, his donkey tried to restrain him. Do you know the story of Balaam's donkey? I like the King James version of that. You know what it called it. You know, Balaam's donkey, the Spanish, our Spanish-speaking people, they have a saying that you need to learn this morning. It is, el burro sabe más que tú. You know what that means? The donkey knows more than you. That comes from this story. Because Balaam's donkey knew more than him, tried to restrain him from getting killed. And God restrains him 3 different times. And Israel, unaware that they had been targeted, that the armies of the Midianites and the Moabites and this false prophet are looking at them, targeting them, trying to curse them, trying to do something to destroy them and destroy their children and destroy their grandchildren. They have no clue. Oh man, look at the river, look at the sand, look at the trees, look at the mountain. We're so happy. And they stay there a long time. They're in a place they shouldn't be. And they continue to stay there. And the problem is the longer they stay there, the more danger they expose themselves to. Now, you can make application to that any way you want to. They were encamped for a long time. They were endangered. They were being targeted. They would curse their lives. And third, they were enticed. Look at, I want you to skip down to Numbers 25. We don't have time to go through the whole passage here. But in Numbers 25, verse 1, it says, now Israel remained. See, there they are in Acacia Grove. And the people begin to commit harlotry with the women of Moab. They, that would be the Moabites, invited the people, that would be the Israelites, to the sacrifices of their gods. And the people ate with them and bowed down to their gods. Well, they got comfortable. They looked around at what would normally have shocked them, and now they're comfortable to it, and they're getting invited to dinner. They're getting invited to sacrifices, and they're being enticed. They are being groomed, so to speak. Look at skip down some more to Numbers chapter 31 and verse 16. These women, the one that were doing the trafficking, these women caused the children of Israel through the counsel of Balaam to trespass against the Lord in the incident of Peor. And there was a plague among the congregation of the Lord. Balaam couldn't curse them as he is targeting them. So he counseled the wicked King Balak and the people of Moab to traffic their own daughters and granddaughters and young women to go after the men of Israel to bring them down. That's what was going on. And to entice them, and it was devastating. This act will wipe out the Midianites, it will defeat the Moabites, and it will cause devastation, catastrophic devastation to the nation of Israel. I think it also kind of poked them a little bit and said, boys, get them across that river, Quit hanging out over here. God has given you the land, insomuch that 24,000 of the people that got involved were infected with some sort of a plague that was associated, and we don't know what it was, and died a horrible death. The people were encamped in a beautiful place. They were unaware of the danger. They were endangered because they were being enticed by human traffickers that would devastate them and ruin their lives. This is one of the worst stories in their whole 40-year traveling in the book of in their Exodus. Here's the problem. Here in the United States, we are now living in the acacia groves of Moab, metaphorically speaking. We are in an area of depravity and moral decay like we have never been. And what's difficult is that Houston, Texas is the leading city in the United States in human trafficking. So the question is, here we are in our naive little bubble, not aware of what is going on. The question is, how do we respond to this? What can we do? Do we just go and hide? One of the things I do very often is I pray the Lord hurry up and return so that He can handle some of this stuff. But what can we do as a church? What can we do? Well, let me give you 3 things that we're done. Okay, number 1, we must recognize the danger. Let me say this again. We've got to quit being naive. We've got to look around. We've got to look at the stats. We've got to investigate, and we've got to recognize the danger. Let me go back to Numbers 31:6. We've referenced it a couple of times, but let me go back to you and read it one more time. Okay, it says, "Look." I mean, that's the way it's behold, attention, open your eyes, look at what's going on. And this is it says that these women caused the children of Israel through the counsel of Balaam to trespass against the Lord in the instant of Baal Peor, and there was a plague among the people. Okay, following that disaster, Israel finally goes to war with the Midianites, who were allied with the Moabites. This is where Balaam lived, and he died in the battle. And even though this is going on, even though they could see it, the men of Israel were still attracted to the women of Moab and Midian. It's addictive. And now they can't put it down. And they have to be told. The book of Jude references this and warns us today. That was thousands of years ago. Warns us today that sexual immorality is disastrous. And Jude cites Balaam in his verse. In fact, Jude is 1 chapter long, so let's go to Jude, verse number 7, and let's read. Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them in a similar manner of these, which is, by the way, that same area later on, having given themselves over to sexual immorality and gone after the strange flesh, are set forth as an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. Now just skip down. Woe to them, for they have gone the way of Cain. They have run greedily after the error of Balaam for profit and have perished in the rebellion of Corel. We talked about the rebellion of Corel last week. There's money in human trafficking, and that's what drives it here in our culture. I want to read something to you because you don't get it straight from any news source. So we'll give it to you straight here, okay? I'm going to read something to you from the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. This is going to be news to you today, okay? Are you ready for this one? Monkeypox is transmitted person to person through direct skin-to-skin contact, having contact with an infectious rash through body fluids or through respiratory secretions, such contact often occurs during prolonged face-to-face contact or during intimate physical contact, such as kissing, cuddling, or sexual activity. That comes from a governmental source. Why haven't we heard that? Sexual immorality is dangerous, especially to believers. It exposes us to infectious disease. It destroys marriages. It causes psychological issues many, many years afterwards. And it is used to target people through those who have been entrapped in human trafficking through force, coercion, and romance. It is dangerous. We've got to recognize this. We can't be naive about it. We've got to understand the source of this. So number one, we've got to recognize the danger. Number two, we must reject the doctrine. What do you mean, reject the doctrine? Let's jump all the way to the end of the Bible to Revelation chapter 2, where John is receiving a message from Jesus, and this message from Jesus calls Balaamism a doctrine. Let's go to Revelation chapter 2 and verse 14. Jesus is sending a message to the churches, to us, to our age. And he says, but I have a few things against you. Whoa. Against us. Because you have there those who hold the doctrine of Balaam, who taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the children of Israel to eat things sacrificed to idols. Let's come on and get involved, okay? And to commit sexual immorality. Jesus calls this, what Balaam did, the doctrine of Balaam. Doctrine. Didache, meaning teaching or instruction. Intentional teaching and instruction. Intentional teaching and instruction. Balaam taught Balak how to entice people with sexual immorality. A research project was conducted by a scholar, I think it was in 2005, from the University of Istanbul. And it reports this, that in the United States of America, 10% of public school students, let me say this again, 10% of public school students report having been sexually abused by a school employee. In 2004, the Department of Education estimated that nearly 10% of K through 12 students in public schools have been victims of sexual misconduct by a public school employee. This would translate into 4.2 million children in our public schools. Now, back in 1999, legislation came across our legislative body here in Texas to go ahead and begin allowing sex education to be taught in our public schools in the adolescent ages. Now, that would be ages 11 to 14. That would be ages 6, that would be grades 6 to 8. And that was enacted in 1999. And right now in Texas, in our high schools, our students can opt out. They can say, nope, don't want to go. Parents can say, nope, my kid's not going in the state of Texas right now. Now, you will hear false reports out there that says teaching abstinence is not working. But at the same time, in the state of Texas, teenage pregnancy has dropped off pretty dramatically. So this legislation is scheduled to begin this coming school year, and on August the 4th. It will actually come to law in August the 4th, August the 1st, 2022. And so a company by the name of Goodhart Wilcox presented the curriculum to be used, and the Texas State Board of Education had to completely reject the curriculum because of the explicit, seductive material that lured children into that kind of activity. Enticing youth with sexual immorality is the doctrine of Balaam. Let me say that again. Enticing youth, enticing young adults with sexual immorality is the doctrine of Balaam according to Jesus. And we can't go along with that. We must reject the doctrine by reviewing textbooks, attending board meetings. Now, you might get, picked up by the FBI if you do that, but go ahead. Communicate with our kids. But we must also provide godly, appropriate instruction for our youth. And that is one of the things that we are beginning to use as strategy in our own youth department here. So we've got to reject the doctrine. We've got to be aware of the danger. And lastly, we must respond to the damage. We have been damaged. In 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 15, it says, they have forsaken, and he's talking about false teachers, okay? False teachers that would promote this. They have forsaken the right way and gone astray, followed the way of Balaam, the son of Beor, who loved the wages of unrighteousness. He loved getting rich off of this kind of behavior. Peter is describing false teachers who exploit youth with deceptive words. And false teachers and leaders like Balaam have damaged our youth, have damaged our culture, and destroys lives for money. In fact, Peter in 2 Peter chapter 2 and verse 3 says, by covetousness, they will exploit you with deceptive words. The rhetoric is strong. The argument is ludicrous, but it's there. Studies and statistics confirm that our culture and our youth have been and are being exploited, targeted, and damaged by this kind of doctrine and the promotion of adolescent sexual immorality, and it is being promoted. So we've got to do these three things. We've got to recognize the danger, reject the doctrine, and respond to the damage. And that is exactly what we have committed to do here at Community with our Youth Expansion Project. Last February, we had our annual meeting, and we unanimously committed ourselves as a church body to respond to this by placing a major focus on the development of our youth and ministry. So let me tell you what we did. In February, we more than doubled our budget for youth ministry. In April, we recaptured our mission and vision of reaching youth with the gospel and having a place for them. In May, this is up here. In May, we unanimously acted to raise funds for a youth facility expansion project. In June, we employed a youth director to be totally focused upon our youth. And now we're planning, and we've been meeting, and we've been working. Now we're planning youth camps, youth activities, a youth band, midweek youth worship, additional branding, youth outreach and evangelism, special training for our youth, protective training for our youth, and mentoring for our youth. And in last week, we launched a capital campaign to raise $400,000 cash to get this project off the ground. And to date, we've seen $151,000 come in. And a lot more promised, just hasn't come in. And so I don't want to put the promise out there until it comes in. This week, someone contacted me and said, listen, here's what we would like to do. We would like to offer a $25,000 matching fund for the next $25,000 that comes in. Do the math, folks. That puts us, we're like a week into this thing, and that will put us at $1,000 over our goal with funds received. I think the Lord might be in this.
Yeah. You think? Amen.
We can do this. There's enough in this room right now to do this. We can do this week. I really want to come next week and do a dance up here on the platform and say we're over halfway. Folks, we have got to respond. The schools are not responding. There's one institution that can turn this thing around, and you are it. The Church of Jesus Christ we can be revived, and we can turn this thing around. Let me leave you with one last story, and I'm done. On April the 8th, I'm talking about this last April the 8th, less than 3 months ago, a 15-year-old girl and her dad were at the Mavericks game up here at American Airlines Arena in Dallas. The girl got up and went to the restroom and did not return. Her father was worried and finally got up and asked someone to go in, and she wasn't there. He could not get the police to open an investigation because of the Texas Family Code laws that we have here. Because without, the Texas Family Code law says without evidence of a kidnapping, we must treat this as a runaway. What had happened? She had been abducted by a team of pedophiles, 15-year-old girl. Fortunately, and she had been taken 200 miles away to Oklahoma, where she was forced to get on the internet, and that's all I'm going to say. 10 days later, a nonprofit organization by the name of the Texas Counter-Trafficking Initiative tracked her down in Oklahoma City 10 days later, where she had been taken by her abductors and forced into the internet porn. And a team of 8 pedophiles were arrested. And here's a statistic I want to shock you with this. The average human trafficking victim age is between 11 and 14 years old. On April the 27th, another 15-year-old girl was snatched just outside of her Arlington apartment. She escaped on March the 27th. Let me say this again. Jesus said we live in perilous times. Our children are at risk. Our grandchildren are at risk. Our young adults are at risk. And we must, it's damaging our culture. It's devastating our youth. And my vision is for our church to make a positive impact through youth evangelism and outreach, where we're winning, discipling, instructing, and protecting our youth. They need to be taught how to be aware. They need to look at the signs. They need to learn karate, you know. And they need us to blanket them in prayer. And that's why we as a church have gone all out by faith to do something that is impossible in days like this. I'm going to appeal to you. Would you get on board with us? Our leadership team is really excited about this. It's going to cost us time. It's going to cost us money. You're going to have to go, and you're going to have to, some of you are going to have to chaperone some activities, and when they start playing the music, you're going to have to put corks in your ears, you know. That's just the way it's going to be. But we've got to be involved. It's up to us to reach our youth, because Our country, our culture has developed the habit of moral failure, and we're in the midst of it.
On behalf of Pastor Dan and the folks at Community, thank you for joining us today at Community on Demand. Feel free to share this link with others, and please know you are always welcome to be our guest during a live service any Sunday morning at our campus in The Woodlands, Texas. For more information, just click on the link www.cbcwoodlands.org. I hope you will again join us at Community on Demand.